So anyway.
Great. David gave us a thumbs up. Good.
You bet.
And I want to thank David. Without David, this would not be happening because he is the best Zoom teacher I've ever had. He's the only Zoom teacher I've ever had.
Because
And
he's so zoomy.
He just zooms right through the material. He's so good at it. Okay, David, do your, what is it?
Well, I can do this one.
There you go. Hey, Randall.
Good, we got Randall too. So Wallace, thank you for not running us over on the Tweetsie trail.
Did you hear that, bud?
You're welcome.
What happened? We were walking our dog on the Tweetsie trail, and all of a sudden it was hi, hi, hi. And it was Wallace and Brian on bicycles zooming by. They do zoom in multi-fashion. There he is.
So, Julie,
be
be sure to check out your passing of the piece photo this morning. That incident is referenced on it.
It's a shame they couldn't hear you, Brian. Your voice was kind of muffled. I hate
Yeah,
that.
you have two microphones on.
Wallace might have to mute.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
We want to see your picture. We just don't want to have the echo.
There we go. Yeah. I said, check out your passing of the peace photo in worship this morning. That incident is referenced on it, Julie.
Oh, good. I'm looking forward to that.
I could explain it now, but I'll probably just wait till next Sunday and explain it. the passing of the peace picture that's coming in.
Oh,
Right.
Your name may or may not be misidentified on that picture.
That's
too,
what I
Julie.
figured. That's what I figured. It's all thanks to Jane and Jack's grandson.
Right.
You know, what I loved about them was that at one point, Julie was telling them about where they slept and they suddenly ran away from the table and Julie said, oh, we've lost them. What they were doing was running into the living room so that they could act out being a skunk asleep in a burrow.
That's so cool.
But I'll go ahead and explain it now. Jack and Jane asked me to give a talk to their grandsons who have developed this interest in skunks. So I dressed up like a skunk, which you will see in passing of the piece. And I was telling them a number of facts about skunks, you know, in terms of where they sleep, how they warn you before they spray, all of these things. And I made the mistake. And at the end of the talk, as the boys were leaving the room, Carter looked at me and he said, "Thank you, Dr. Skunk." So I made the mistake of telling several of my friends about that, and including Brian. And so explaining the passing of the peace picture. So I'm forever branded. So I'm sorry about that. You will see it this morning. But it was fun.
You may or may not be labeled as Dr. Skunk on the passing of the peace this morning.
Oh dear.
So
Okay.
Julie, you said several of your friends and Brian.
Yes. You caught that. Good, Jack. Oh, goodness. All right. Let's leave skunks and go back to evolution. David, do you have any announcements or anything you need to make?
No, I would preface this by saying, you know, that there are, you know, evolution is such, in religious circles, is such a hot topic. You know, it's so fiercely debated, and that's because it is challenging to a lot of theological stances. And I hope we can have some discussion on that, but that will probably mostly we'll get into that next week, I guess. I don't know. So I'm gonna say that, and then I'm gonna say, Julie, you're in charge, and I think you know what to do.
Oh, let's hope so. We'll find out. All right, folks. Last week, we talked about a lot of the early evidence for evolution and why evolution is still occurring, how it has occurred. We ended last time talking about some of the extremely old genes that we have inherited from ancestors that go back 500 million years ago. That's a long time. Our eye genes, our limb genes, our heart genes, our embryology genes, all of these came from very primitive ancestors. And what we want to do in a moment here is to look at where we go from there. But first, these were supposed to be the last two slides last week, and the computer kind of shut down on us. This is from Neil SHUBIN, who wrote this wonderful book called Your Inner Fish. That was the basis of one of the evolution talks a number of years ago. I can imagine few things more beautiful or intellectually profound than finding the basis of our humanity and remedies for many of the ills we suffer, nestled inside some of the most humble creatures that have ever lived on the planet. All right. It was going so well, David.
Well, so right arrow, left arrow on your keyboard.
Neither one is working.
I'll be darned. Hover over the lower portion of your screen and see if an arrow appears. Yeah, well, well, dang.
Experiencing technical difficulties here.
Well, you know, and so everybody will know, Julie and I practiced this, and we tried this 4 or 5 times, and it worked every time. And it just needed your presence for it to work.
Sorry about this.
I can see an arrow in the lower left-hand corner of that slide. Can you see that arrow?
I can't.
Go over, Julie, over.
Yeah, okay. That's going backwards. Let's see the other arrow. Okay. Thank you, Larry. That may take us where we need to go. I'll just use that arrow. Okay. Thank you, Larry. A similar quote was from Darwin himself in his book, The Origin of the Species, that said there's a grandeur in this view of life with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And that's while this planet has gone on cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. And this one, Brian, is for you. John Hope, a theologian at Georgetown University, has written extensively about the need to incorporate evolution into the modern fabric of theology. He says that theology must evolve or face becoming irrelevant. We'll know if it's a full-fledged revolution when fossils, genes, and embryos are discussed positively in Sunday school. Welcome to the revolution, everybody. Now, if we look at the age of the earth and how far we've come, we've talked a little of that about some of that last time. But when you think of the earth as being 4.6 billion years old, and the fact that it basically did not have life on it until about 3.5 billion years ago, and that the organisms that formed on the earth for the first billion years were the microbes and the viruses. That's all that was here until about 500 to 600 million years ago, not billion, million. And that took us into this Precambrian era so that life basically began to expand. Now, last time we talked about our common chordate ancestor that dates back 520 million years ago, that has some of the same structures that show up in us as embryos, and basically most life forms that are vertebrates, that is, those with the backbones. So what's happening now? Darwin had the view of natural selection. And what we're looking at now, unfortunately, is that we live in an era of unnatural selection. For those billions of years, every organism on the planet evolved through natural selection. Not one was designed by an intelligent creator. Giraffes have long necks due to competition, not the whims of a super intelligent being. At some stage, evolution, chimps and Neanderthals evolved consciousness and the ability to plan ahead. The agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago changed the whole regime and took us from natural selection to unnatural selection. We went from hunter-gatherers whose days were filled with malnutrition, disease, and violence to an unnatural urban environment. Our most dangerous predator today is another human. We've domesticated ourselves just like we did our pets and livestock. We choose diverse mates and have mixed cultures, and we are global in our distribution and travels. As we alter our environments, we're altering our bodies and our evolution. We challenge our bodies in ways our cave ancestors never imagined. No exercise, decreased violence, increased calories, pesticides, lead paint and gasoline, urban life, 16 hours of light but little sunlight, pollutants in our air, water, and food, and on and on and on. Our evolution is going from a slow, random mutations to rapid human-directed process. We're going to look at ways in which that happens. And in looking at how that happens, we'll look at 4 major areas here that have contributed to our unnatural selection that we see today. And these will include the human genome, which we talked about last time in terms of the genetic makeup of organisms, the epigenome that I'll explain in a moment, the microbiome, and the virome. These are all gene-containing biomes that constitute our hologenome. In other words, you're going to see we are made of a lot more than just cells. These groups interact with each other, they evolve at different rates, and they define our biology, and we're now modifying all of these. So what is epigenetics? I want you to notice on this particular image here of DNA that is unwinding, that you will see these structures. Can you see my pointer? Is that showing up? Okay.
Yeah.
That you see these structures here that are attached to the DNA. And over here, they're attached to the histones that we talked about, those proteins that basically are used to roll the DNA into a smaller structure so that it can fit inside the nucleus. Epigenetics is the study of changes in gene activity that do not alter the genetic code, but can still be passed down to 1 or more generations. In other words, you're not actually causing a mutation to occur here. You're just modifying the gene, sometimes temporarily. Hopefully, many of these would be temporary. But these changes are governed by cell material that sits outside the genome, hence the term epigenome. This material tells your genes to switch on or off due to environmental factors. That word environment continues to be important, just as it drove natural selection in the early life forms on this planet. It continues to drive evolution in us. Now, these environmental factors that can cause our genes to switch on and off are things such as diet, stress, UV rays from sunlight, car exhaust, cigarette smoke, social interactions, nutrition. So many of these can alter the expression of the genes. So it's basically a biological response to an environmental stressor. If you remove that environmental pressure, these epigenetic markers will fade. So it's basically the non-genetic transfer of information through cells, and it can influence evolution, resulting in a person's particular characteristics. These are just a few of the processes that can be impacted by epigenetics. Embryonic development, aging, behavioral changes like PTSD and depression, carcinogenesis, cancer formation, drug addiction, diseases like diabetes, Alzheimer's, autism, schizophrenia, obesity fits in there, and many others. So what are these markers? It was believed for many years that the changes in the DNA had to occur through mutations. That is an actual change in one of those bases that you learned about in the DNA last time. But we now know that molecular tags can come in and change the expression of a genome. That is, an epigenomic marker, such as a simple methyl group, can come in, attach to the DNA, methylate it, and change a gene's expression, thereby turning it on or off. Remember that that gene is a stretch of DNA that codes for a particular protein needed in the body. DNA damages are very frequent, occurring on an average 10,000 times a day per cell. You have millions of cells in your body. That kind of damage occurs every day. These damages are largely repaired, but at the site of the repair, sometimes you can have epigenetic changes that can remain. That is, one of those molecular markers can remain behind. We have over 20,000 genes, but it's estimated that we have millions of regulatory elements that comprise the epigenome. And this is being worked on now, just like the genome was worked on to come up with the genetic code of humans that was finished, I think, in the early 2000s. Now they're working on the epigenome, trying to spell that out in terms of what controls what. Think of our genome as our hardware, our epigenome as our software. And the epigenome is what acts as switches that turn these genes off and on. And here's a few of them that you see. You see these methyl groups that are attached here to the DNA. You see acetyl groups that come in, and these are the histones again, where these epigenetic markers come in and bind. So it can be anywhere along the DNA or in the histones themselves. Again, this is a response to an environmental stressor and can markedly affect the way heritable changes in the DNA sequence are expressed. It explains how, again, the environment can affect the expression of our genes, resulting in changes to our appearance, our behavior, our susceptibilities to disease, and even nerve function. If that environmental pressure fades, then the epigenetic markers will fade. Only a change in the DNA itself is a permanent genetic change, and that one is known as a mutation. So I guess every time I would hear that the government had reduced the requirements for emissions from power plants, from all kinds of environmental toxins that were being released into the atmosphere, I just cringed. Because what we're doing with those types of deregulation is basically putting more of this junk out there in the environment that can get into our bodies and become epigenetic markers that basically modify our DNA. And again, here's another image showing that DNA and how those markers can come in and attach. And again, what that does, it acts as a switch. It may turn that gene off for a certain period of time. And sometimes that can be for a few generations. And then it may, if the air is cleaned up, if the water is cleaned up, then that may go away at some point. So scientists are looking at inheritance in entirely new ways. We now know that genes do not entirely define the essence of a human being, and that they can turn on and off. Our genetic destiny can be modified, and that can be an environmental event. We can inherit the effects of our ancestors' environment. If you were adopted, your biological father smoked, but you never met him, your health will be affected. You have those markers in your system. As we modify, shape, and domesticate our environment, we also modify ourselves, where epigenetics provides a pathway for rapid evolutionary change. In other words, instead of the slow, random mutations that occurred for millions of years, we're speeding up the process. So, what is the future here? Another way in which we're impacting our bodies and causing unnatural selection to occur is through our microbiome. Now, when we talk about biomes, we're basically talking about a community. If you think of a jungle, if you think of a coral reef, if you think of a mountaintop, these are living communities. Well, the biome basically that we're talking about here is the microbiome. This is the one that consists of microorganisms that occur as massive. What happened? Okay, massive assemblages of competing and cooperating microbes found everywhere on and in us. Now, if you're a little squeamish, hang in there, because it's going to get worse in terms of my telling you what all is on and in your body right now. Each of us hosts a diverse ecology of microbes that has co-evolved with our species over millions of years. We are symbionts. That is, we live in harmony with these microbes, with these bacteria. They enter our bodies when we pass through the birth canal. And at that point, we get trillions, not one or two, trillions of microbes that enter our bodies. They perform valuable services for us and protect us in many ways. The vast majority are harmless and all have specific functions that may involve digesting our food, keeping out harmful microbes, or aiding in our immune response. Remember that Earth formed 4.6 billion years ago. For over 3 billion years, those bacteria were the sole living inhabitants on Earth. I think they're probably starting to get ticked off at us and trying to get rid of us now when you see this global attack of the COVID virus. And we'll see viruses are even more plentiful than the microbes here in a moment. But basically, if you look at some of these living inhabitants on Earth, they have found that the earliest proof of ancient life is a 3.5 billion year old fossilized microbial mat that's been found in Australia. If you also look at the bottom right here at this picture, this one is from Yellowstone. And if you ever go to Yellowstone, be sure and walk around and see these microbial mats, these areas where geysers are steaming. And as I stood there, it was like seeing evolution. It was like seeing life evolving, coming up through those vents in those fossilized mats. And these are current mats. These are still going on here in Yellowstone. What is interesting is that in this early life, they occupied the land, the air, the water. They still drive chemical reactions that create the biosphere. And they've established conditions that allowed evolution of multicellular life. Remember, when the Earth first formed, there was a lot of volcanic activity, there was a lot of heat. The conditions were not conducive to living organisms. But as these bacteria formed, and they can live most anywhere, they could live in those conditions, they began to make Earth a kinder, gentler place, where basically oxygen ultimately started to form. And with that oxygen, that allowed a lot of life as we know it to begin to evolve. It's said that without microbes, we could not eat, breathe, and probably could not survive. Without us, microbes would do just fine. These are self-contained organisms. They can breathe, move, eat, eliminate waste, defend against enemies, and reproduce. Remember last time when I showed you the image of the cell in the body. These are essentially the same kinds of cells here that can do all of those things that I talked about and basically survive many, many adverse conditions. Our bodies contain about 10 trillion human cells, but we're host to 100 trillion bacterial and fungal cells that co-evolve with our species. So as they evolve, so do we. They're everywhere, everywhere. Skin, mouth, nose, elbows, gut, toes, both inside and outside our bodies, making our bodies huge ecosystems. Each of us has about 20,000 human genes and about 20 million microbial genes. So we're mostly microbial. I know that's kind of hard to wrap your brain around, but it's believed that we have about 10,000 different species of microbes in and on our bodies. Very few are harmful. And each of us has a particular bacterial footprint based on our personal histories, where we've lived or traveled, what we've eaten, who we have lived with and loved. All of these are factors that determine our bacterial footprint. Each is unique. And they're saying at some point, this can be used just like a fingerprint is today to determine an individual's identity. Our personal micropopulations remain fairly stable unless pathogens invade. Eventually, we will edit our personal microbial communities, which will alter our lives, our survival, and that of our descendants. We're basically not individuals, we are ecosystems. And they're not all bad. These microbes are necessary for our health and well-being. Just don't do like a friend of mine when I told him that we have mites, microscopic mites that live in our eyelashes. Well, he's been hosing his eyes out ever since, and I keep telling him, don't do that, don't do that. You need these organisms that they're there for a reason. You don't know they're there, you don't feel them. It's like right now, your body is teeming with these bacteria, and as we'll see with viruses too, you don't feel them, and you can't wash them off. It's basically there to help us, to keep us healthy and who we are. Microbes, as you can see, can occupy different regions of the body. Most of them are associated with our orifices or openings into the body. Although you do have some that live on your skin. Again, you can't scrub them off, you don't want to, but you can see that the different colors here represent different species that can occupy particular areas of the body. And I just read this a few weeks ago. Autism occurs in about 1 in 54 children. These children have a number of issues, among them abnormal gut bacteria and behavioral issues. By using microbial transfer therapy, which is being used for a number of diseases right now in an experimental capacity, over an 8-week period, There was an 80% decrease in gut symptoms and improved behavior. So this gut transfer of bacteria, they're thinking, for example, it might help with folks who are gluten intolerant if you receive the correct microbiome. I was asking my GI doctor, I said, you know, doc, I said, I read that people who are obese have one set of one type of microbe in their microbiome, and the thinner people have others. I said, is there any way I could get an infusion of these? And he just looked at me like I was crazy, but I'm used to that. But anyway, with the autism, you know, there's a lot of very severe conditions that can occur, and some that are mild. But who knows what this type of treatment in the future might help in terms of many diseases, not just autism. So this bacterial diversity that we find on our hands, for example, just our hands. And when you think about it, when I first read this, do men or women have more bacterial diversity? I would have guessed men, but I was wrong. It turns out men's skin is more acidic, they sweat more, and that can impact the bacteria. Hand washing doesn't have much of an effect because bacteria colonize clean hands and others come in and join them right behind them. Only 17% of microbes were found on the dominant hand that were also found on the non-dominant hand. That one was surprising to me. On a computer keyboard, each fingertip and its corresponding key had the same microbial community. Also, half of the keyboard where each hand rests had microbes found on that hand. A computer mouse can be matched to the user's hand with 90% accuracy just on the back microbes that are there.
Wow.
All right, and the last thing that I want to cover today is the last component that can affect our makeup and basically contribute to our unnatural selection that is going on, and that is the virome. Just like we've had the genome, we've had the microbiome, and now we're looking at viruses, the oldest life forms on Earth. And these are everywhere, from volcanoes to geysers to the ocean floor to all over and in our bodies. They have also found that with these viruses, that they can transmit genes from one individual to another through horizontal transfer. That is, in us, our genes come from grandmother to mother to us. And here you're talking about a transfer that can go from one individual to another's horizontally across, sitting beside someone or being beside someone. They can insert themselves into our DNA and they can recode it. They can recode it. They evolve and mutate at a very rapid rate. We're seeing that with COVID this year, the variants that are already starting to show up. We don't know how they affect us from day to day or from generation to generation. Biologists estimate that 380 trillion viruses are living on and inside your body right now. That's 10 times the number of bacteria. As mentioned earlier, our bodies are a superorganism of cohabiting cells, bacteria, fungi, and viruses. About half of all our biological matter in your body is not human. Is not human. Just one image. Now, these viromes begin to accumulate when we're born. They show up first in the infant gut after the ingestion of mother's milk. And whereas the infant viromes change considerably in the first number of years, the adult viromes are much more stable. They do not target our cells, but they look for the bacteria in our microbiomes, which they enter and use the bacterial machinery to replicate themselves. And then, of course, the bacteria dies when they do this. We breathe in a viral code that enters our cells and can take over our DNA. Whoops, sorry. Let's go back here. And they have these effects. They can kill us, such as Ebola. Our body's immune system can kill them, which is what we're hoping that some of these vaccines will be able to do. And the virus in our body co-evolve so that the virus is less virulent and our body stops attacking it. This third method results in new genes that arise as the viruses invade our genome. About 8% of our genome is viral in origin. And the functions of these viral elements are not really understood yet. Viruses are known to impact human health, and work is underway to manipulate our microbiome and virome to protect us from disease. For example, the brain tissue of deceased Alzheimer's patients revealed high levels of herpes viruses. Could we find new roles for old viruses to treat diseases? An enzyme from a virus is being used right now to kill bacteria that cause staph infections and is now in stage 3 clinical trials. As you know, staph infections are major issues in hospitals. We will see more uses of good and bad bacteria in the years to come. Viruses continually move in and out of our bodies. Our virome is poorly understood, but it has coexisted with us from the beginning. Just to show you what a single sneeze can do, it can propel 40,000 droplets, with each containing 200 million individual viruses across this room at speeds of 200 miles per hour. So please, folks, when you sneeze, when you cough, cover that nose, cover that mouth, and you can see why masks are so important right now to help prevent that kind of spread. If I'm in a grocery store and somebody sneezes, I just go to a different aisle because I just don't want to be in that cloud. So what's next? Our body's evolutionary journey is far from over. Natural selection continues to adapt populations to changing diets, germs, and environments. However, our cultural evolution has vastly outpaced the rate and power of natural selection. Today, we are big-brained, moderately fat bipeds who reproduce rapidly. We are physically active and can run, walk, and climb. We eat a diverse diet. We make and use tools. We live in cooperative groups and are innovative, and we communicate extensively. As a result, we've spread across the planet and are no longer hunter-gatherers. However, our bodies are still the ones we inherited from our ancestors, and they have not caught up with our lifestyle. So, what is the next stage in human evolution? And that is where we will pick up next week when we talk about genetic engineering, the next step, and another major way in which we're modifying our genes, our whole genome, and impacting our future. We're basically designing the next human race. All right, I will stop there and see if you folks have questions. Did I lose you?
Nope. Nope.
That was a great talk, Julie. I loved it. I learned so much.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Suzanne. So nobody's rushed into the shower to try and get those bacteria off?
Well, I have a simple question.
Yes.
I had Matthew, he was breech, so I had, cesarean. By not going through the birth canal at birth, did that affect him poorly? I mean,
Have you seen a difference in terms of the health of the two individuals over time?
I just really had Matthew.
Oh, you just had the
Kathy.
one. Okay. Okay.
Kathy Crosley, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I had
Um,
two, but the second one didn't make it.
Yeah.
No, Matthew's always been very, very healthy.
Okay. Okay.
So
Well, we get those microbes from many places once you're out of the womb, whether you come through the birth canal or it is through a C-section. And so those are picked up rather rapidly as soon as they surface, so to speak.
well, I breastfed, so.
Yeah. And that helps tremendously.
Hmm.
Other questions?
So I attended a seminar Tuesday by,
A little bit louder, David.
I attended a seminar Tuesday given by scientists at Crown Laboratories, which has a manufacturing plant here in Johnson City. And they're exploring the development of the use of the microbiome in cosmetic agents for skin care. And mostly the seminar was about the bacteria that cause acne and how we all have this bacteria and it lives in our hair follicles and we all have it all the time, but we don't have acne all the time, right? And so they were exploring, so what causes, what triggers the virulence in the bacteria that initiates the disease that we know as acne. And then that and they had found some things and they were moving on with that to other elements of the skin microbiome that promotes skin health. And they're really making some progress with this. I mean, it's going somewhere.
There's a lot of work going on in a lot of different diseases right now in terms of the connection of those diseases to our microbiome. It's something that we didn't even think about existing not that many years ago. And now they're finding so much information. It's going to be fascinating what comes out of it.
So, and there's another area of therapy associated with microbiome, and that's with intestinal disorders, specifically things like irritable bowel syndrome or ulcerative colitis and so forth, where some of the therapies involve what are called fecal transplants. And it turns out that the most effective donor is the patient's mother.
Interesting. Interesting.
When I went for my colonoscopy, my doctor, we talked about multiple sclerosis and she was all excited, Julie, about the fecal transplant possibilities. She even mentioned that in England, apparently, they had done some studies on fecal transplants for MS patients and said that, maybe that would really help your MS or cure it. And I didn't really follow up on it because at the time it just wasn't something I was going to do. But that's something that it's coming along. People are saying that it could cure a lot of different problems.
Yeah.
That was my doctor that recommended that, Julie.
That's great. That's great. As I mentioned earlier, one of my friends is gluten intolerant, and she has so many things that she has to watch her diet so closely. And I was telling her about this fecal transplant that can be done that has been shown to really, really help with gluten intolerance. And she just went, ooh, But when you think of what it could do for you, in fact, you can eat bread, you can eat cake again, you can eat these things that now you can't just by having this transplant done. If it were me, I'd jump on the chance. I would, but that's just me.
Is she considered celiac or is she just gluten intolerant?
It's hers, I think, is just a gluten intolerant.
Yeah.
My daughter-in-law has ulcerated colitis. I mean, she's got ulcers in her colon.
Yeah.
And she's found out that she can only eat like 15 different kinds of foods, 15 foods she's found that doesn't give her bloody diarrhea.
Wow. Wow.
My sister had a knee transplant, and when she was in rehab, she got a UTI and they put her on a strong antibiotic, which wiped out the normal flora in her gut. And she ended up with Clostridia difficile infection, which can be fatal. It's pretty bad. She ended up in ICU. She ended up having that 3 different times as she went through long-term care, rehab, and things, and ended up in the ICU each time. And I had looked into fecal transplant, and it had like about a 92% efficacy rate. And I mentioned it to the gastroenterologist at one of the Florida hospital down here, and he just poo-pooed the whole thing. You know, I think it was just kind of early
So to speak.
in the research, but it just was so upsetting to me. They were treating it with Cipro, which is, you know, a really strong antibiotic that can cause its own issues. So yeah, it can be pretty bad.
Yeah.
You know, several times I've had taken antibiotics and the doctors have said, take probiotics. And
Yeah.
I've seen online is that those aren't really complete compared to what you're talking about here. But anybody have any opinion on this probiotics over the counter?
Well, you have to be careful which ones you take. That's one of the things that you have to consult your doctor about, because you have a microbiome that's uniquely yours, and it all depends on what you introduce. Some of them might be compatible with your microbiome, some might not be. And so I'm not sure how they would go about. I'm not sure they can do these tests today. Do you know, David? Can they test the microbiome at this point and come up with what you need as opposed to what Jeff might need?
You know, I'm not aware that is.
Yeah, I don't think it's there yet.
Any kind of a therapeutic regimen.
Yeah.
I will say that I had a recent tooth infection and was looking at having to take clindamycin for it. And clindamycin is the most likely antibiotic to cause a C. diff infection, and didn't want to take it. It's pretty scary. And but I thought, you know, I'm gonna watch this infection, and if it doesn't get any better, I'm gonna have to take this drug. And so I started loading up on kefir, which is like a cultured dairy product that's got supposedly a lot of pro-microbial elements to it. So and looking into the literature, it's like, well, no, there's not really any definite information that says that this is effective. But I like kefir.
Yeah, the problem with oral probiotics is that they have to survive the stomach.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And
well, you know,
the pH in the stomach is really low. It's a very strong acid.
Sure.
And most bacteria can't get through the stomach alive.
Yeah, but you know that some of the microbial therapies are given in capsules.
Yeah.
Which is you know, really
carrot coatings. Yeah.
Unappetizing to think about, but
or through suppositories, you know, that would get the bacteria in one orifice at least where they could be used.
Sure.
You may know that my daughter is pretty much immune compromised, and that's why she's here. We have done all kinds of things for her because when we learned more about the gut biome and the interactions with health, the commercial market is just raking it in on the prebiotics and probiotics. Doctors have now really kind of gone to the prebiotic and the probiotic, so that it's 2 different kinds. The cultures, like the ones that Andrew takes, have millions of different kinds and whatever. The problems we've done the fecal transplant with her, just myself and her, so that it was genetically more or less kind of the same. We've also participated in the American Gut Study. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I can't pull it up right now. But anyway, it's a really decent attempt. You send in a fecal sample, of course, and they identify and measure the ratios of different kinds of microbes in your gut. And so anyway, I guess as a standard for people who know they have someone who's struggling with this or that, I would highly recommend the gut study, and I'll find it and post it in the chat. It's very specific, and it's very enlightening, actually, being that she has half of my genes and our biomes are so different. And that's partly also just the notion that you inject or supply the gut with a variety of microbes. It isn't just a one-time thing, because they have to find a good environment, and they have to be nurtured in a total pH, hydration. There's all these other factors that determine how well the bacteria can survive in the new environment, and they have to outcompete the existing in order to be successful. So it's a repeat process that is, you have to be patient. You have to work at it. And there's a lot that goes on, obviously. So anyway, I'll find that American Gut Study, because I think it's actually a universal. It's not just American now, but it's really, I think, enlightening for those of us who have people that we love who are immunocompromised.
Has this helped her, Carol? Has some of it helped?
Yes, mostly what we learned is more through a nutritionist and the combination of that gut study. So she eats very specifically and prepares food in a certain way, because even boiling versus whatever changes the enzymes. You leach out a lot of material, a lot of nutrients, when you boil foods. So there's just a whole combination of things, a suite of factors that you have to take into consideration.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing that, Carol. That's fascinating. I was listening to a program yesterday where they were talking about how what you eat impacts that microbiome in very, very specific ways. And the things, there are certain foods that obviously enhance the quote good bacteria, and there are others that enhance the bad bacteria. And so that's why diet is so critical in terms of maintaining a healthy microbiome and therefore a healthy body.
If I can add one more thing, my mother-in-law is 91, and we've learned that UTIs cause her mental capacity to change significantly. And that's a result of the, I could say, effluent, the byproducts that those bacteria give off affect the brain. And so, as I understand it. And so there are things like that where it's the combination of metabolic processes of intake and the things that they give off, and then the reactions of our bodies to those products, not just the bacteria themselves.
Yeah. Interesting.
Of course, sugar being a real culprit.
I know. I hate that part.
I love sugar.
There are also implications in that same vein in mental health.
Yes.
Just, with for the example of the autism cases, is that their gut health and their behavioral health in an autistic person seem to be linked in some way. And that applications of dealing with the microbiome have broader implications, I think, than for just autism, perhaps.
Yeah.
So as soon as there's any crack in the evidence wall where somebody can make a substantial claim, the commercialization that follows will just be a tidal wave.
Yeah.
I mean, it will be, McDonald's will pick up on it. You know, anything related to microbiome health and diet. Some, you know, commercial entity will recognize that, wow, we can make money off of this, and hopefully they'll do it in a way that's beneficial to everyone.
Yeah.
But it is ripe for commercial exploitation.
So buyer beware.
Yeah, and it's also, yeah, it's also, you know, ripe for inappropriate exploitation as well.
Julie?
Yes.
Okay. One of the, I think, aspects that is, I don't know, hard to understand many things, but the transmission of instinct from one generation to the next. Is there any known mechanism by which instinct gets transmitted from parent to child to down through generations?
Oh boy, Jeff. That's a good question.
I was afraid of that.
Well, certainly behaviors are learned, I think, from parents and from relatives. I think as offspring grow, they learn certain behaviors.
Right.
But instinct is considered more of an automatic response to a stimulus. You know, I mean, it's you know, if you get too close to that fire, you're going to pull your hand back. I'm sure there's genes in there somewhere for that, but how that is transmitted, I haven't really seen that addressed in any of the articles I've read, but I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
That's a great question.
That is a great question. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think my mind immediately goes to birds, you know, who assume when the parent comes back to the nest with a worm, you know, the baby birds all assume this posture.
Mm-hmm.
Or ducklings will imprint,
yeah,
you know, on something larger than them and follow it.
Yeah, yeah. So do baby skunks. Anyway.
In humans, isn't risk taking? Haven't they proven that to be a genetically carried?
Yes, good point. Good point, Gary. The people that like to skydive, that like to bungee jump, that like to do all of those thrill-seeking sports are supposed to have more of there's a specific name of the gene. Does anybody remember what it is that they've identified for that?
It's the D2DR gene.
D2DR. Okay. All right.
I thought they were supposed to have more testosterone.
Ew.
I think it applies to women and men, not necessarily equally. It's probably influenced by testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a genetic, they call this associations, right? There's an association between risk-taking behaviors and the number of repeats of a particular element within the D2DR gene, right? It's got a little sequence in it that can repeat itself, you know, 2 or 3 or 12 times.
Mm-hmm.
And the bigger the number of repeats, the more likely you've had more than one speeding ticket in the last 2 years. Or that you like to ride roller coasters or have jumped out of an airplane or have a motorcycle or
the thrill seekers.
Yeah.
The thrill seekers. Yeah.
Or go around without wearing masks.
No, I think that's a different gene. I think that's the dumb gene.
Or vote Republican. No. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah.
Actually, to the contrary.
Yeah. Jeff, there's just so much that we just, even though they learned the makeup of the genome years and years ago, there's still so much that they don't understand that these genes do, and especially the interactions that are there. You know, when you got over 20,000 genes in us and how they all interact in certain ways to create a unique individual is something that we're still a ways away from determining. Even with our powerful computers today, they're making progress, but it's still going to take time. Maybe in Wallace's lifetime, it will be there.
Great. I understand.
All right. Well, I'm looking at our clock and we've about used our time, and we're gonna, I guess I'm gonna head us towards closing out. And I see that Ginger's here, and Ginger has unmuted, and hopefully Ginger, do you have a blessing for us?
I do. I do.
Great.
May your angels help you hear God's whispers. May you understand those whispers that stir your heart. May you act on those whispers for the goodness and the well-being of all. May the whispers be planted in your heart like a flower opening to full bloom. And may those whispers reflect the greatest goodness for the greatest time in this present world. Amen.
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 Thank you, Ginger.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, Julie.
Thank you, folks.
Wonderful.
We'll talk about genetic engineering next week. So.
All right.
I'm looking forward to it.